Good evening. Welcome to this week's Rooms with a View. We have 4 exciting guests this week. We'll start off. I'll introduce you to Lisa Marchiano. She is a Jungian analyst, author and podcaster. Her new book, Motherhood, Facing and Finding Yourself, uses fairy tales and myth to explore motherhood as a rich opportunity for personal development. Hi, Lisa.
Hello.
We have Stella O Malley. She's a psychotherapist, writer, and public speaker. And she's part of a team launching Genspect, an international organization that seeks to advocate for the parents of gender dysphoric children. Hi, Stella.
How's it going?
We have Angela Wilde. She's an artist and activist best known for her lesbian advocacy within the group Get the L Out. She'll be using her art exhibition Bundle of Joy as a springboard to discuss the challenges and contradictions that lie at the heart of motherhood. Sounds good. Hi, Angela.
Hello, hello.
We have once again Gemma H Atkinson. She's a feminist activist who runs an organization focusing on the well-being of young girls. It's called Yes Matters. Hi, Gemma. Nice to see you again. And we have also regular member Chinzia. Hi, Chinzia.
Hello, evening all. Good to see you all.
So we'll start, I think, with Lisa. Would you like to tell us about your book?
Sure. When I was thinking about this book, I was a young mom myself. My kids were. My son was a newborn and my daughter was 2 when this idea first came to me, and I've mostly been working on it and raising those kids ever since. And what I was curious about is what was happening to me as I mothered. What was happening to my psyche? How was I developing and changing? And I went looking for books on that topic, and I couldn't really find very many. There are a few, and there's some very, very good ones, but there's really just a handful of them. And it's interesting because when you go looking down that rabbit hole, what you find are a whole bunch of books about how to parent, and very, very few about the experience of the parent.
Yeah.
And, reading parenting books is a good thing. I like parenting books and I read a ton of them. But what about the mom? What about the mother? I mean, I think this also arose out of my own personal story. My mother, was a very good mother who loved us very much, but she was frustrated. She felt stifled in her growth by motherhood. And so I think I grew up a little bit with that legacy in my unconscious. And so what intrigued me was, can motherhood be part of a growth process? Is it just an impediment? I mean, of course, in some ways it is, but is there another way that it helps you grow? And that's the thesis that I explore in the book.
That's wonderful. Yeah. I don't remember once thinking about myself or about my well-being when I was raising my children. So yeah, that's really interesting.
Yeah, I mean, mothers are certainly encouraged or kind of the notion of mother in our culture is that we will do everything for our kids and kind of sacrifice ourselves. And a lot of us do a lot of that. So where are we in it, in the experience?
Does anyone have any question?
Yes, I do. So I was listening to an interview with you. I'm so sorry, I can't remember names. It was another American lady. And you were discussing how you didn't like the feminist analysis on fairy tales. And I am involved in feminism, and we do see that the feminist analysis, that it was wrote by men, that women are subjugated and girls. And I was listening and thinking, I see value in your work, Lisa, absolutely. But my head is in feminism, and reading these fairy tales to my little girl, you can see it, and you can't deny that they're not, kind to women and girls.
Well, I think it's a bit more complicated than that. I think it's a complex question. First of all, I would say that as a Jungian analyst, I really love fairy tales, and I used a lot of fairy tales in the book to lift up psychological themes. And when I read fairy tales, I'm reading them psychologically and symbolically. It's not actually true that they were written by men. The German fairy tales, the Grimm's tales, were written down by men, but probably women were primary authors throughout the centuries. I mean, some of these tales are thousands of years old.
Yeah.
And I would have to assume that women were the storytellers by and large. And some of the major collections were also written down by women. So it's not necessarily true that they were authored by men. And it's also not true that even most of the tales kind of show these ways in which girls or women are subjugated by men. There's a lot of fairy tales with very strong female characters where it's the woman who saves the man or figures out the problem. There's just scores of those. The other thing I would say, though, is when it comes to understanding a tale psychologically, the way that a Jungian approaches a tale is to assume that all the people in the tale are aspects of a single psyche. So, for example, one of the fairy tales that I talk about in the book is the Selkie Bride, which is a story about a small farmer who's out on a walk on the beach one night, and he comes across these three beautiful women naked sitting on a rock singing, and he falls in love and he wants to marry one of them. So he moves toward them, and they all don their skins and turn into seals and slip in the water and swim away. And he's stricken because he wants to be with them. So he goes and he does his research and he learns what he has to do. So the next time he meets them, he's very quiet and he sneaks up and he grabs one of the skins. And when they hear him, two of them put their skins on and dive into the water and swim away. But one of them is left shivering alone on the beach because he has her skin. So he comes over and he covers her with his coat and he says, "You're going to be my wife. It's going to be great." He takes her home. They get married. They have kids. She's a dutiful wife and a dutiful mother, but one of the versions of the story that I read says her children never see her smile. And then one day, her youngest child says, "Mother, why does father keep an old skin behind the brick?" And she says, "Where? Show me." So he shows her. She takes the skin. She bends down. She hugs and kisses her child. Then she runs off to the beach, slips on the skin, and her children never hear from her again. So there's different versions of that tale, and there are different ways to understand it. One of the ways, and I think it's a legitimate way, is that this is an issue of the way that women's freedom is curtailed by childhood and marriage, that women are kind of essentially, it's a kind of enslavement or diminishment, that women lose their access to their sovereignty and freedom. I think that that's a legitimate way to read it. And there's another way to read it too, that the small farmer is an aspect of her that's inviting her to settle down and grow up psychologically. This image of sort of swimming in the open waters is maybe appropriate if you're thinking about it symbolically in one stage of our life. But as we grow older, something is required of us, so that we sacrifice some freedom so that we can come into the particular person that we're meant to be. Some people struggle with that and they kind of remain, childlike forever, just psychologically. It's, looks like that sort of Peter Pan complex in men. It happens to women too. So, that's just another way to read the tale. It's not that one is right and one is wrong. They kind of complement each other.
Yeah. I mean, my immediate thought was, wow, hang on, you've just left your kids. That was my immediate instinct.
Sure. Yes. Yeah. Yep. Yeah,
Sorry,
she
Gemma,
doesn't. She doesn't manage. She doesn't manage to make that sacrifice and really commit herself to this new way of living. She slips back into the water in the first opportunity.
Can I ask how many fairy tales and stories that you've come across? Because obviously you've come across a lot of different ones. How many of them have gender stereotypes embedded in them? Would you say, like, including sexual objectification of women and girls, entitlement?
That's not how I read them, though. I mean, they're old stories, so of course there's kind of traditional roles.
Gender stereotypes that have been going on longer than fairy tales, maybe.
Sure. But in terms of, again, I read them symbolically, so it doesn't carry a lot of water for me to think about things like sexual objectification, because I'm thinking about that it shows an inner psychological dynamic. And that to me is where the wisdom is in these tales. There's so much wisdom in them.
It occurs to me, though, as well, that, like, folk tales are brilliant and wise, but they're horrifying. Like, they're dark. There's a lot of darkness in them. And honestly, for thousands of years, women have really had very difficult lives, which is reflected in the fairy tales. And I'm really glad that we have this kind of evidence that we wouldn't have in many ways, but it's evidence of the lives and of the terrible lives so many women had and mothers had, and the sacrifices, that one being kind of demonstrative of how difficult life can be. I think it's really important that it doesn't get whitewashed, so that we kind of throw the baby out with the bathwater by just saying, oh, well, that doesn't show women up well. No, it doesn't, because women had a horrifying time.
Well, and fairy tales are full of stories of resilience in the face of challenge. So, I wouldn't want us to cut ourselves off from this source. It's a real source of wisdom and comfort.
I still read fairy tales. I still read the fairy tales to my children, to my girls, even knowing that some of these stories are a little bit off. The Princess and the Pea, and it's how women are going to be controlled, how they should be. I still read them. There's still wonder in them, and like you said, Lisa, still messages that maybe I've not thought about, actually, but because you're into psychoanalysis, I'm not coming from that, because I have no training in that. So, but there's still wonderful moments in those stories. And we still read them.
We'll read Tatterhood and the Hobgoblins, or Kate Crackernuts, or lots of there's wonderful collections of women in folk tales where the woman is the heroine who saves the day. Many of my favorite fairy tales are those.
Not only that, though, I think it's very important that when you do, I know I read fairy tales and I was very heavily into them when my kids were young. And I made it my business, because I suddenly realized, God, some of these fairy tales have been Disneyfied, and they've wrecked the ending. They've wrecked them.
Yes.
And so I had to really search to get the real fairy tale, as opposed to the princessy pink fairy tale. So you kind of have to be kind of quite discerning about your fairy tale and make sure that you've got the real thing, because then you're going to get real depth, as opposed to the dresses.
That's perfect, Stella. Thank you for making that point, because I hate the Disneyfied version of fairy tales. I mean, it's just awful. It takes all of the psychological depth out. It just slathers on the gender stereotypes, and it's done for money and marketing, and that you've got a great point, Stella. There's so many collections at this point, and that the scholarship is getting better all the time. There was just a few years ago released a new version of Grimm's, which was like the more original, unboulderized version of the tales that has all of the. So yes, that's the one. That's the one. That's great. Excellent. And there is real depth there. Yeah.
I find it difficult as a radical feminist to not look at the political aspect first and to not look at the patriarchal propaganda first. Sorry?
You go.
Yeah, it's true. I really can't. It's so I've kind of not. We haven't had fairy tales here. I know there's some depth to them, some of them, and I don't claim to know all of them at all. But what I understand, and I think you mentioned that. But what I understand is that basically they were written, and then they were rewritten, and then they were rewritten again and again and again. And the way I see it, they were rewritten every time in a more patriarchal way.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's really interesting if we have access to the very old tales.
Yes.
They might tell a different story. They might have a different ending. They might have a completely different, not such a patriarchal conclusion at the end and things like this. What I wanted to ask you is when you said, I'm quite interested in there's a lot of book on parenting. There's not a lot of book on and it's really my experience. I thought, that's great. There's plenty of children and women's group to learn how to parent, but there's no group for mothers, for example. And so you said what is the growth aspect that you mentioned that it was a lot of things that were motherhood was difficult for women and maybe restricting our lives, but you mentioned some positive things. Do you want to maybe talk a bit about that, what you found?
Sure, yeah. And that's a really great point about the fairy tales being rewritten. It is really fascinating to find the most original, purest version possible, or to compare versions from other cultures and that kind of thing. Yeah, I mean, let's see. I think what I want to talk about is one of the things that I mention or that I explore in the book is the way that motherhood can help you find your authority. A lot of women come into adulthood without a really good sense of their own authority. They may have been socialized to be accommodating, to be nice, and being able to know what you know, to know what you need, to know what you want, and then be able to stand your ground and ask for that thing, even when people are aggressive or challenging or laughing at you. That is a really hard thing, and I think it sometimes tends to be harder for women. Not all women, but I see this in my psychotherapy practice, that this is often a job that women need to do in adulthood, is really come into their authority. And part of my thesis is that motherhood can help us do that. And part of the reason why that's true, I think, is that if you are not very good at advocating for yourself, but then your kids come along and you realize you need to advocate for them, then you find your stance and you can be really fierce. And actually, Angela, I'll tell you one of the fairy tales that has it's an incredible image of patriarchal wounding, and it has all these different versions, some of which are more overlaid with a kind of Christian patriarchal thing, is the Handless Maiden. And it's the story that I use in the book to talk about authority. And so I'll just tell this story really quickly and then discuss how I see it. So the Handless Maiden's father basically makes a deal with the devil, one of those things where he's run out of money, he's out in the woods, he meets a man, says, I'll make you rich, just promise me whatever greets you first when you get home. And the miller's like, oh, that's going to be the cat. So he comes home and his daughter comes running, and he realizes what he's done. He's made a deal with the devil. There's gold in every coffer in the house, but he's promised his daughter. So the devil comes to claim her, and she surrounds herself with holy water. And so the devil can't get her. And then eventually the devil says to the father, take all the water away so she can't do that. And he does. But then she cries on her hands. And because she's cried on her hands and kind of purified herself that way, the devil still can't take her. And he says to the father, cut off her hands. And so the father does. So then at that point, the devil's like, never mind, I don't want her. So she goes out wandering in the world with no hands. It's a brutal story. And there are versions in so many different cultures of the same image. And I think it's, a real image of the wounding of the daughter by the personal father or by the cultural father. And eventually she meets a prince and they get married, and he makes these silver hands for her to replace her hands. She has a couple of kids. When he's away at war, her mother-in-law doesn't like her. And so essentially there's this long thing that happens. She winds up having to leave and go out on her own. Her husband thinks that she's dead. She goes out on her own. She's in the forest. And now I'm going to switch to this is the Italian version of the tale. I'm going to use the Italian ending. She's in the forest with her babies on her back. She has no hands. She comes to a pool of water, and there's an old woman sitting by the pool of water. And the handless maiden says, I'm so thirsty, I want to drink. But if I bend down to drink, my babies are going to fall in. Can you help me? And the old woman says, do it yourself. So she bends over to drink, and her babies fall in. And she looks at the old woman. She says, help, my babies have fallen in. I can't get them. The old woman says, get them out yourself. She says, I have no hands. The old woman says, plunge in your stumps. And the handless maiden plunges her stumps into the pool. And at that moment, her hands grow back. Mm. And it's such a beautiful image. First of all, that the healing happens in the presence of the old woman, which is this archetypal image of deep feminine wisdom. Yeah. And then that sometimes when we've been wounded by the father, either the cultural father or the personal father, what allows us to heal ourselves is the way that we extend ourselves in the interest of our children. So we save our children, and in that moment, we also heal ourselves. Mm. So we become able to care for ourselves.
I can deal with that handing. It's okay.
So Lisa,
my radical self.
Lisa, your book's already out, yes?
Yeah, it's out in the US, and I think it comes out in the UK on June 28th.
Oh, brilliant. I look so forward to reading that. I really do.
Thanks.
Thank you for that. Stella, could you tell us about your Genspect, your group?
I can, with pleasure. I do want to say I've read Lisa's book. I've been lucky enough to have the privilege to read it. It's amazing. It's really nice. Really, it's really special. Really just one of those books that you'll keep in your room, as in like that's one just to keep. It's a really beautiful book, really, really beautiful and special, Yeah, so it's lovely to see things like that coming out. Yeah, we I'm a therapist no more than Lisa. Actually, I was called a clone of Lisa Marchiano recently on Twitter. I was thrilled. But yeah, I'm also a therapist, just like Lisa, although I'm not a Jungian analyst. And I've kind of got together. I run a lot of parent meetings for the GDSN, that's the Gender Dysphoria Support Network. And these are parents who are unhappy with the treatment that their gender questioning children have received. And they feel that they've been dismissed and they haven't been listened to, and that the doctors have basically sidelined them out of the treatment. And the vast majority, we're talking 95% of these kids have diagnosis, whether it's autism or ADHD. The parents that come to our meetings their parents are very vulnerable kids who came with huge number of diagnoses and issues before they ever had gender issues. And then very much in the framework of Lisa Littman's study of ROGD kids, they suddenly, through social contagion very often, either through a friend or through the internet, they suddenly discovered gender and decided to kind of pin all their distress on a solution that would be transitioning, medical transition. And these parents come and they're traumatized. They're really traumatized. And we run a range of meetings every week. We started with one meeting. It was very much a lockdown thing that I said, a few parents had asked me, would I run a meeting? I says, yeah, sure. And I kind of thought it would be a few meetings and I don't know, it would peter out or something, but it didn't. It's extraordinary number. And now we're running, 5 at this stage every week. and more parents are coming all the time. So because these numbers, extraordinary numbers of parents were coming for these therapeutic support meetings and all saying the same thing, we started dividing them then, because the parents of boys were all saying the same thing. The parents of girls were all saying their same thing. So we divided the meetings so that there was just parents of girls, parents of boys, younger parents. So many issues have come out with this. It's extraordinary. So we started, that was a very long intro why we started at Genspect. So we're just starting Genspect in the next few weeks. And the idea is to give a voice. So to reach out to the mainstream media and to say there's thousands of parents, and we have literally thousands of parents, because we've asked all the parents groups from all over the world, loads of parents groups in Australia, in America, in England, up in Scandinavia, in Germany. These are parents groups that have all self-organized. So we did the GDSN and I'm part of that, but there's many, many more. And they're all silent and they're all anonymous and they're all very private because they're afraid, because they've got very vulnerable children who are in what they perceive as inappropriate treatment and getting inappropriate treatment from doctors who don't seem to be willing to kind of bring in the issue of autism, bring in the issue of trauma into the treatment program. And so we're trying to give a voice to the voiceless, and we're trying to kind of reach out to the mainstream media and say, listen, we're in touch with all these parent groups and they're saying the same thing. We're not happy with the treatment our children are getting. And so we're very excited to be launching it in a couple of weeks. And we're hoping that we get lots of support from people to kind of let the parents speak and let them kind of have a voice, because they've been so silenced.
Yeah.
Are you worried, Stella, that charities will take you to court? Because obviously we know that Mermaids is involved with the Good Law Project in taking the LGB Alliance to court. So we're now in that. Do you worry that they will come after the parents as well?
We have lots of worries because we're living in very heightened times and very kind of intense times. So it would be easy to worry about a whole raft of things. And in a way, when you involve yourself in gender issues, I think you have to weigh that up and decide, am I going to speak out or am I not? Like, where am I going with this? And so I just think that the risk isn't as important as the issue. And I think the issue is bigger. And I really think it's huge. And I think when these parent stories come out, we've got one of our pages in our fabulous website. One of our pages is parents' testimonials. And they're from all over the world, just parents just giving their story in about 200 to 300 words and just going bang, bang, bang what their story is. And you read a few of them and you'll just literally, you'll go, oh my God, oh my God.
I'm really looking forward to read about that. And I had a question, because you mentioned trauma in maybe the life of young transitioners. It's not something we talk about a lot. We maybe talk more about autism.
Yeah.
If there is trauma in the life of a young child or a teenager, is it likely that it's coming from the family? I mean, there's a little bit of a double issue, I think, that growing up and being a lesbian, I know that like a lot of my family didn't want me to be a lesbian. They didn't openly say so. They were not physically violent, but I grew up like that. And that maybe society rejects children's homosexuality, potential homosexuality, and then so family is a very, very oppressive place as well. Is there a room somewhere in your website, in your project, to investigate these things as well? Because they're really, I think, intricate and very complex. Not to point the finger, but from experience, I know it's not simple.
Oh, you're right. When you say it's a very complex issue, and you will find when you're reading the parents' testimonials, you will say there's loads, because there's a whole kind of cohort, 67%, I think, is of gender non-conforming children are same-sex attracted when they're older. So there is that whole issue, okay? Then there's the ROGD crowd who do have, there's a significant proportion of them might be same-sex attracted, but not all of them. So there's a lot of kind of, oh my God, there's so many different issues that I could ramble on all night. But to what you're saying, the trauma that I'm noticing in the meetings among the parents, most of these parents, maybe, the way you attract what you're into yourself, if you follow me. So the people who are coming to me, they're liberal progressives who honestly think the majority of their kids are same-sex attracted or else sexually repressed. And
Yeah.
sexual repression. And they aren't, I would say, the classic, I know what you're talking about, kind of homophobic parents who kind of really try to girlify the kid.
Yeah, this is a bit of a stereotype,
issue.
but I'm from a family of parents who did May 68 in France. They were in the sexual revolution and this kind of stuff, and they're still really homophobic. It's not that simple. They're left-wing, liberal, not religious, don't want a lesbian daughter, you know.
Yeah. And I know. And, you know, I've heard somebody say, I was only talking to a detransitioner the other day, and she said, you know, these parents, she was given out, and she says, these parents, you know, they didn't want a lesbian daughter, and now they've got a trans daughter, and now they're annoyed. Well, suck it up, parents. And I'd say, well, you wait till you meet these parents, and your jaw will drop, because they will be talking about so much distress in the kid's life. Very often, a lot of the trauma is shocking. Things like bullying comes up, and sexual trauma, you know, the sexual kind of advances that they didn't want and were very kind of threatening, and loss of identity. Maybe they were one person and they lost their identity and they're seeking an identity. There's a lot of ways into gender questioning, and there's a lot of ways out of it. And so, yeah, you raise a good issue, and yet there's a bigger one. And imagine if you were, let's say, a flawed parent, like all of us are. Certainly I'm very flawed. And then inappropriate doctors come and give your children such inappropriate treatment. Well, it's like one of Lisa's fairy tales. It's like, this is Grimm's fairy tales in the 21st century. It really is, when you hear the stories of just profoundly inappropriate treatment for you know, we're talking first, second session, and they're deeply, you know, they're deeply traumatized, the kids are, and the parents have been along the way, bring them to maybe different specialists all the way through for their ADHD, for their autism, for the trauma that they suffered as a result of it, and then suddenly gender comes and suddenly they're transitioned. It's extraordinary when you come across it, but there's going to be loads of conversations, I think, coming out with this.
Stella, I'm so glad you're doing this, and I'm glad to hear about the parent testimonials, because of course, you know, I've worked with these parents too, and I've been hearing these stories for years. And one of the things that always amazes me is that a lot of people just don't realize what's happening. And you'll hear people say, well, nobody's given hormones until they're 16. Or, you know, no one's having surgery until they're 18. And it's like, well, but I can show you this paper that was written by Joanna Olson Kennedy where the kids were having mastectomies at 13, you know, 14, 15. I mean, we know this is happening. Yeah. If you talk to these parents, you hear these stories all the time, but it's just so easy for people who either have a vested interest in denying it, or lots of people just don't know. And they say, well, that's not happening. Yeah. So somehow we need to get the word out that it's happening.
Yeah. And, you know, the parents can't speak. So the testimonials are anonymous, but all the parents groups are on the website. So they're findable. So everything is it's all coming out with this website, because you couldn't look at this website without thinking, this is a big movement. And nobody's actually really heard about it. I know in Ireland there was a huge movement in the 1980s called Concerned Parents Against Drugs. And these were parents from really difficult kind of really poor areas. And heroin came into Dublin. And they grouped together and they fought to get heroin out of their area. And they were very powerful people, the parents. Nothing like, and Lisa would know it well, nothing like the kind of the channeled anger of a parent who feels their child has been attacked. And you know what I mean? I think MAD, is it Mothers Against Drunk Driving? They're another example of the same thing, I think. Where again, there's an awful lot of power. And by the way, just for everybody's stats and interest, 95%, and I went and checked it today before this meeting, 95% of the parents that come to our meetings, the GDSN meetings, are mothers. There's a lot in that.
There's a difference with the groups that you've just described, the Irish one and the other one, because they have the law on their side, don't they? They have they're seen as being on the right side, whereas with the children, the medicalized children, you have the the other side that are telling you, no, it's okay, they're fine doing this. So it's like you're on the wrong side, if you like. So it's important for you to, obviously, what you're doing is brilliant, because it's showing that, no, we are right.
Mm, mm. And much as most parents are flawed, and we all bring, you know, our own issues to our parenting, I also think most parents really love their children and they really want the best for them. And if they are absolutely devastated and incredibly furious about the medical treatment their children are getting, somebody should be listening. And if there's thousands of parents who are saying the same thing about same, and what's a real key point about these gender questioning kids with similar personality types, like why would they have similar personality types? Answer me that. Like that doesn't make sense unless there's a certain type of personality that's susceptible to the promise of a medical transition will solve and resolve all my, and I mean all my issues, because these are really really distressed kids.
Stella, can I ask? So I have been doing some reading around this issue in the UK. So this is like UK-based information. And someone who used to work at the Tavistock Centre, who no longer does, and he did an interview, and he said that a lot of girls are now going to get like gender services, and that he believes that a lot of that is part of becoming a teenage girl. Sorry.
I hear where you're going. Teenage girls.
Sorry about that. So becoming a teenage girl and therefore becoming more visible to men, and so getting like sexual harassment and things like that happening. And also today, Ofsted, who assesses schools, find that 9 in 10 girls feel unsafe at school because of rape culture and sexism in schools. So, you know, what I find really interesting is the reason that we have like sexual objectification, all that stuff, is gender stereotypes. And so what we're doing with the whole trans thing is reinforcing those damaging gender stereotypes. That's not going to solve the problem. That's going to surely make it worse, because it's more of the same thing. So I wondered if you would notice that with the parents, if there's been trauma with girls experiencing things like that and then wanting to transition to escape being a girl.
Yeah, when I say trauma, I definitely include sexual trauma. It is a big issue. I honestly think there's a few things you've said in that, because I think, for starters, I think we've given, you know, a little bit more attention to the menopause in the last 20 years than we ever did before. But I think we've started to come around to the fact, like, this is a big event, and it's unacknowledged how much distress and, you know, how much it impacts women. But I don't think we've given the same attention to girls' puberty. And I think it's very, very, very difficult. I think girls going into puberty is a major event. We kind of thought that if they knew about periods and they knew about breasts and they knew about everything, they'd be all right. And that hasn't worked out. They do know about all this. We have told them all. And actually, it's still really, really difficult to go through girls' puberty. I know, I don't know how difficult it is to go through boys, but I strongly believe personally that it's actually a good deal more difficult to go through girls. For starters, periods and the pure mechanics of it. And if you're young and if you're 10, you can't even organize yourself because it's complicated. The whole pads and changing and when to change and hygiene and all that isn't an easy thing for a 10-year-old to navigate. And it certainly puts a lot of tension on our life. And sports, and I can't go swimming, even though everybody's swimming. Like, it's big. I don't think we've kind of really touched on this at all. And then suddenly you've got breasts, and suddenly you're sexualized, and you were sexualized before you have become sexual. That's a really heavy burden for kids. And they've done kind of studies of when is the first time a girl get sexual kind of unwanted attention. It's young, like it's 11. You know what I mean? That they're getting it too young. And not only that, you get these kids into secondary school, and I think this is yet to come out in any big way, which is what you called it, rape culture, this extraordinarily aggressive kind of sexualized culture in schools. I did a TED talk about this, specifically about this, about girls in schools, because how difficult it was. Like girls are getting like, do you know what I mean? Like, I remember why I did that on the TED talk was because a friend of mine said, when I think back on it, I was being sexually assaulted every day. People were groping me and we were just pushing them away as if this was normal behavior. Like, they were literally grabbing me and I'd push them away. I remember that. And I'm not convinced it's better. I'm not convinced at all it's better. I think that there's a really extraordinary level of sexual objectification happening to girls who often haven't yet really found themselves. And yet they've got breasts, which are front and center in their body. And they've got periods that they're navigating, and there's shame around that. We're only in the halfpenny place with this.
I completely agree. And I think it is worse because now there's pornography in your phone. So there's pornography in the school. I mean, what you're describing is exactly my experience. Groping was every day. Teachers didn't care. Boys will be boys. Let's not talk about it. You come home, you don't understand what's happened to you. There's no word for it. It's normal. And now there's pornography. And I don't know. I think Gail Dine was saying that the impact of exposing girls to pornography, it basically creates the same symptoms as rape. That children who are exposed to pornography develop the same symptom as rape or similar.
I think there's going to be something come out in and around the kind of trauma from exposure to pornography. I really think that's going to come out. I think that's kind of been unaddressed. Since 2012, the smartphone is in our pocket, high-speed, Wi-Fi is in our pocket. In fairness to the young boys, they're being lured in by a multi-billion industry. They've been lured in with cartoon porn and Fortnite porn and Grand Theft Auto porn. So they're being pornified, and then their pornification is intruding in the schools. Now, that's a generalization. Obviously, could go a different way, but Jesus, it's a huge problem.
Yeah, and then boys learn power through porn. There's nothing to hinder that. How would you not like it? They learn power from it, but we learn powerlessness from it. And what you were saying also, Gemma, about the reinforcing stereotype, there's really two molds at the moment. Either you embrace gender stereotype as in femininity, and then you have to grow your breast and do surgery to be extra feminine, or then you have to reject it completely, and there's no kind of ground for just being neutral, just being how you are without being an extreme or another.
There's also bigger things to consider is that whilst each phone is an access to pornography, it also gives each person with a phone the potential to be a pornography producer, because the most popular pornography categories are those where consent isn't there. So, like upskirting, toilet porn. So, they're being surrounded by phones with pornography, or with the chance of becoming pornography and pressuring for nudes and all that kind of thing as well. They're surrounded, essentially. These girls are surrounded. And with the boys as well, I mean, I have a son, and we've had many an uncomfortable feminist talk. Poor lad can't escape my politics. But also, one thing that when we were talking, once that he said really struck me was that, we talk about positive reinforcements when we're parenting. What's a more positive and more powerful reinforcement than an orgasm? How is that not going to reinforce that behaviour? And again, pornography, it follows the gender stereotypes, the sexual object, the man is entitled to it. The dominant, the submissive, it's the same thing over and over again. And I can't see how we're labelling gender stereotypes progressive now. I just don't understand it. It infuriates me.
So when is your website up and running, Stella?
The 18th or the 19th of June. So what is that? 10 days. Genspect.org. And you can find the Gender Dysphoria Support Network now. Like, they're the parent support meetings, and there's lots of parent support meetings. And sadly, they're hamstrung by needing to be anonymous a lot of the time. But if you make contact, you'll find your support eventually.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Thank you for that, Stella. Angela, can we talk about your exhibition?
We can. Okay, so it's not new. It's basically I just want to share a little bit about my own experience as a mother, and then lead to that. It will be as short as I can make it. I've got an 8-year-old. A bit too early for the screenshot, but there you go. I've got an 8-year-old child, and when I got pregnant, I was in a long-term relationship with his father. It was coercive control relationship. It was violent, abusive, financially and emotionally. The kind of domestic violence situation that you can't necessarily see. But with the pregnancy, it became much more obvious. It became much more violent. The power dynamic completely shifted and it got worse. I spent most of my pregnancy in depression. I was feeling completely trapped within my house, within my so-called relationship, within patriarchy. It was very, very clear. And when my child was 6 months old, I left his father. I also left heterosexuality. So it was at the same time, like really liberating, really accelerating, really radical. I accessed much more radical politics at that time. But when you live a domestic violence, an abusive relationship, you're not well. So I experienced PTSD, which was never diagnosed, lots of trauma, loss of identity you were talking about, like really couldn't remember who I was. GP reaction was a lot of gaslighting. You're letting yourself go. You need to support your husband. At worst, at best, I had a woman who acknowledged I wasn't well and medicated me or tried to medicate me and said that with my level of trauma, of depression, because there was no trauma, right? With my level of depression, I could never overcome it by myself. There was a chemical imbalance in my brain, blah, blah, blah. She wanted to medicate me. And I think I was leaning very radical at the time already because I thought, actually, there's nothing wrong with me. I've got a normal reaction to an oppressive, violent situation, and none of the medication nobody's ever going to give me is going to change the fact that I've got an ex-abusive partner that carries on abusing me, that I'm isolated, alone, no support, no income, dependent on the state, feel powerless. And so I rejected that. I thought it was really pathologizing something that was really political. When I started to be able to sleep a little bit more when my child got a little bit older, I started to wonder what actually was happening to me as a mother. What you were saying, Lisa, what is happening to me as a mother? But what's the context? And I started looking at things I had never really looked at before. Data, statistics, what's going on in terms of discrimination in the workplace, domestic violence, post-natal depression. I looked at the stats. I listened to a lot of women. I spent hours in children's center just listening to women's lives and try to get a bigger picture. And because I'm a political artist, my mind just works in pictures, and I started to make pictures in my head. So I started to make pictures in real life. And I had an exhibition. I was really lucky. There was a mothers group that helped me to find a room to exhibit. Ironically, that mothers group was run by the Tavistock. I didn't know at the time, but there you go. Yes, so this is where I'm going to show you some images. So maybe I'm going to try. Okay. Can you? Oh, brilliant! You're on the website. I don't know if you're going to be able to read, but basically, I was trying to do a few things with these images. I wanted to first show. Do you want me to try to share my screen, maybe? Because that would be really, really small. All right. Shall I try? Okay, I'm going to try to share my screen. Can you tell me if you can see something? Can somebody just say yes or no?
Yeah.
Yeah, brilliant. Okay. So what I wanted to show, first of all, is how love for our children is used as a tool of silencing. Because every time I raised a political point around motherhood, every time I had, but don't you love your child? Which is, I think, not the point at all. But it's a way to say, if you're complaining, it means you don't love him or her enough, and you should, be ashamed of yourself. I was really, really fed up with this. I also wanted to highlight what I saw as the deep contrast between the patriarchal stories that we are told about motherhood, an illusion that is, an illusion of domestic bliss, everything will be fine. It's a bundle of joy. That's why I called it like that. It's going to be all great, and it's going to give your life meaning, and there's nothing better you can do in your life, and so on. Not that I believed in all this myth, but I certainly didn't expect the reality to be so harsh. So I wanted to contrast that with the realities, and the realities basically where the statistic I found. So things like 70,000 mothers across Britain suffer from postnatal depression each year. That was in 2014. I'm not sure what that's. Huh?
I love that.
Yeah, so you see, it was about showing like in a very pink, kind of happy kind of way.
Mm.
And then when you get closer, you're like, oh, that's not actually that nice, which is how I felt about it, really. And I found that there was a lot of hidden truth. For example, we're not really told that. We're not also told that the leading cause of death in mothers in the first year of their child's life is suicide. When I found that fact, I was like, what? How the hell is that not front page of every newspaper until we sort it out? It's a scandal. Yeah. How is that possible in a society? Not only that it happens, but we don't know about it. Beyond. So I was really showing all these things like the cost of childcare. We live in a capitalist world where women who have children cannot afford to work. Doesn't make sense to anyone.
Yeah.
This kind of thing that just brings you back to the domestic sphere, that constrain your life when women would like to work, which was my case. I really wanted to work and I couldn't afford it because I couldn't afford the childcare. Mm-hmm. Domestic violence, here there's nothing new. I mean, we know it as feminists, but again, it's not that clear that 30% of domestic violence starts in pregnancy. A little bit of a dig at the men, because most of the housework and childcare is still the responsibility of the women. And I think increasingly when children arrive in the family, and things like discrimination in the workplace. So these stats, again, the 2014, they've increased incredibly under Tory government. I think they doubled in 2 years, and I don't know what they are now, but I'm sure they're not better. Women get discriminated against. They lose their jobs. When they get pregnant, it's illegal. It happens all the time. And at the same time, a lot of men, when they become fathers, get promoted. Mm-hmm. And I think this is really interesting, and that we don't necessarily make the link, but we hear a lot of, we had children and I, the wife, decided to stop working. Yeah, it makes sense. It makes sense when you see that obviously there's a structure around you that, give him more money. Of course, she would stop working. It makes sense financially. It's not these kind of decisions are made out of nowhere, out of thin air. There's a structure around it. Yeah. And we don't really see that. And so all these kind of things. So these are things that I pulled out of articles, but I also wanted to show the material difficulties to access anything, as well as the structural difficulties to access anything, and on and on and on. So just do the thing, become a mom. So I'm going to stop sharing and just finish off. What I really wanted to show, that if you hide the truth, the stats, these things that are really happening, you hide the oppression. And if you hide the oppression, you also hide the oppressor. No oppression. Nobody's oppressing anyone here. There's no root cause. It's just happening. So you've got this postnatal depression floating. Don't know. Nobody's kind of talking about where it's coming from. It's natural. Is it hormonal? Maybe it's the woman's fault. Maybe she's just not a good enough mother. Maybe she killed herself, but she was just not. I don't know. But then also it allows to medicate, which just basically superficially fix the problem, send the woman back at home, do your work, sacrifice yourself, be the carer of everyone else at your own cost. So again, one of the points was to say, we're not looking at the root causes, and that means we cannot change anything about the system, and there is no willingness to change anything. And in fact, there is so much no willingness to change anything that things are getting worse and worse. So that was my contribution today.
Fascinating, because it all resonates as you're going along, each one. The one that popped to my mind straight away was when I was working, I got promoted and then I became pregnant about like a month after. And all the way through my pregnancy, I don't know, it might have been my paranoia, but it felt like behind my mind was that, oh, they probably think that I knew I was pregnant when they promoted me, or, you know, those sort of thoughts. So yeah, it totally resonates.
Being pregnant at work, I had a male boss who was a bully who decided that he'd bully me even more because I was pregnant. I really believe that women are targeted as well for being pregnant by men.
Oh, God.
And he would make me pick up boxes, really knowing that was against the law, especially with pregnant women. And so there is, we don't discuss that as a society, do we? That pregnant women are picked on, and breastfeeding mothers, it's just endless.
It's my experience that, I mean, I'm 1.75 m, I'm tall, I'm strong. I've never been physically assaulted. Sexually assaulted, yes, but physically assaulted, never in the street. And when I got pregnant, it happened to me all the time. But I mean, all the time. I don't think it's a coincidence. It never happened to me since.
Yeah.
I think a lot of our institutions reinforce that as well. So I'm a single mum to my son, and my son has additional needs as well. And, he, unfortunately, to deal with trauma and sensory issues, sometimes he self-harms. Never have the school rang his dad, never have the hospital or CAMS, none of them, We have EHCP meetings, child action meetings. No one asks dad what provisions he's making. No one even mentions that dad doesn't turn up to most of them. It's, it's all reinforced. And the same with child maintenance. If I decided, oh, do you know what? I think I'll just give a £5 a week to my kids' needs. I will be done for child neglect. He will be removed. It's all completely reinforced, this idea that parental rights have to be equal, but parental responsibility certainly is not.
Yeah.
And no matter what you do, you're a bad mother, but do the bare minimum and you're a good dad.
Yes, the double standard is outrageous. Yes, I agree.
Gosh, I remember when my ex-husband used to change a nappy, it'd be like, oh, look at him, he's changing a nappy. I change a nappy like nothing. It's so true. Wow. Just to mention the Angela's exhibition, the details should be scrolling down the bottom.
This exhibition happened it happened in 2014, and I ran it several times in different places. But the first one was in Tottenham, and there's pictures on this website. The statistics, unfortunately, are not current anymore. A lot of the research have been pulled or updated. A lot of research are not. You can't find them anymore, which really reinforces this idea that things are getting hidden.
Yeah. Wow.
Angela, I'll probably contact you about this separately, but I'd love for the 16 days of activism, which is every year.
Yep.
I'd love to talk to you about using your images as part of an exhibition in my hometown. I'd love that, because I just think that, when it comes to issues like this, like, I didn't know any of those statistics. I'm absolutely shocked by some of those things. But if women come together to shout, we're more likely to be heard. That's it, right? So, yeah, I'd love to do that. And I think telling pregnant women or telling women and girls the truth that motherhood can be difficult. It's like it's a secret, isn't it?
Yeah, telling women who are in motherhood that it's difficult is good. Telling women who are not in motherhood that it's difficult is maybe even better, because I would have loved to know. I might have made a different choice. I might have, I'm not saying I would not have had a child at all. I'm saying that maybe I would have done it differently. And it's really like talking about informed consent. Like I just fell into, I really felt I fell into this situation where, like, I've always managed. I've always been financially independent. What the hell is happening to me? I'm an adult. I can support myself. Suddenly, everything is falling apart. Women are not aware how badly things can go. I think it's really, really important to highlight this.
Yeah,
Oh,
I feel like reinforced by, like, people say we have a society, the harder you work, the more you get. That whole class lie as well.
Mm-hmm.
And like the situation that I'm in, so my son's dad, he and his new wife are looking to buy their second house. They have 2 cars.
Yep.
And he didn't do well in high school. I have 2 degrees. I've presented research to European Parliament. I've helped to write 2 government policies. I've started my own organisation. And I live on £62.45 a week carer's allowance.
Mm-hmm.
And in many, many interviews I've had, I've been told, we're sorry, we're too concerned that you have caring responsibilities. We're not sure you'll be reliable. And it's like they keep you in a place that's exploitable. They give you this idea that if you work hard, and that's got nothing to do with it. So then you just end up blaming yourself and thinking, oh, I just need to work harder.
I know, but I think we really need to link all these statistics. 25% of women, of mothers, are single mothers. We don't really know how many of them are escaping domestic violence. I don't know. Maybe I need to look into that. I don't know if there's correlation and what extent it is. But the vast majority of single mothers live in poverty. So, there's a link here, you're one step away, like one man away from poverty, really. Once you get dumped, this is what happens. I remember feeling so shocked where I was in a situation where I was on benefit and I could not rent because nobody in London will rent to a single mom on benefit. It's discrimination and it's legal. I tried to challenge it and I was told, it's been tried before, you don't stand a chance. It's legal. Unbelievable. I lost 5 years of income out of that. 5 years where I could not work. And when I started working again, I was so damaged still after 5 years that I could not be employed because I could not sustain an employment position because I was too unwell. This is really impacts financially as well.
For that gap, don't they? Then they're like, well, what have you been doing for all these years? As if being fully responsible for another human being is completely easy. Like they judge you and they call it, why have you had a work break? I want to kill when people ask me when I had a work break. It's perhaps it's to keep us exploitable or to punish us for not being in that traditional role, maybe. But I can't think of another bill in the world like child maintenance that you can either force somebody else to pay it for you or just not pay it and then it not be reinforced. I can't think of any other bill in the world that you can do that. And but it's allowed, and I just don't understand.
Yeah. Okay, thank you so much, Angela, for that. Gemma, can we have your topic today, please?
Hello. Well, there were 2 things really. The first one was to say that I saw a news clip thing on the news on TV today to say that birth rates have gone down significantly in Europe, especially in Italy. And they were going through, all these reasons. They were talking about environmental stuff and COVID and stuff like that. And I'm sat there and I'm like, it's men. That's why. I mean, yeah, fair enough. I'm a feminist, so I blame men for everything. That's valid. But I was thinking, like the things that we've just been talking about, that, the pornography influence, so they see us as replaceable. They see us as disposable, as we see historical high rates in domestic homicide. They're essentially an extra child to look after. Or if they do anything, they want loads of praise. Or they've buggered off and don't help in any way, therefore leaving us in a bad position. I'm like, well, why would we? Why wouldn't women be choosing not to get into this mess? We have this never-ending list of things that men want us to be, want us to be thinner, they want us to be hairless, they want us to be white, they want us to be this. And they still don't know where our clitoris is. They've not even got to basic step 1. And we're on step 22,006 million, and we're going to have to airbrush our kidneys next. It's ridiculous. But it's, you know, and now the men are there scratching their heads going, oh, I don't know why don't they want to give us babies? I can't think. Why aren't they okay with me going into the bathroom, wanking off to Pornhub to a schoolgirl whilst I've got an actual schoolgirl in my house that I don't look after? Like, you know, it's like, I don't know how they can be clueless about that, you know. So yeah, that was the first thing that I noticed. And the second thing that I noticed was about this thing, the Ofsted report in schools, that, you know, 9 out of 10 of our girls in schools are feeling unsafe because of rape culture and sexism in schools. And it's, I mean, the thing is what not necessarily what joins us together as women, but I guess a universal experience is that of sexism for women and girls. You know, we saw that in the Me Too movement. We've seen it, you know, in many other ways. And I just wonder, you know, how mothers can prepare their daughters for this stuff. Like, do we tell them the truth? Do we, you know, how do we do that? I mean, what fathers do is deny that it's a problem until their daughters are a teenager, and then they admit, oh, actually, yeah, it is all men. I lied for that 20 years. It is all men, so you can't go here, you can't dress there, you can't do that. You know, so they know exactly what's going on. Yeah. And so because I saw this going on, what me and the Yes Matters team, I guess, have done is we've put together something called the Yes Matters Commitment, which is like a list of things that schools will have to commit to doing to address rape culture in schools. And we will give them training to do that. Because with the new PSHE that's come out, these teachers have to talk about domestic abuse. They have to talk about consent. They have to talk about what's healthy, what's not healthy. And the things that teachers are not prepared for are the ocean of disclosures that they are going to be met with when they're talking about these things. When these children are getting the information that, oh, that's not normal, oh, that's not okay, oh, I shouldn't keep that secret. So we're going to include staff training in that as well, so that they can make sure that they don't victim blame, that they can make sure when they're addressing these incidents at school, that they're making sure the perpetrators are the ones that inconvenience and not the victims. You know, making sure that if it's a case of child sexual abuse, understanding that the majority of perpetrators are family members or family friends, and to be aware of that, to be aware that the legal route might not give the child the closure that they naively think that it will, you know, all sorts of things like that. So we've put this together to hopefully schools who care about addressing rape culture in schools will make the Yes Matters commitment, and we can address that for them in their school. So that's what we decided to do today, which was
that's wonderful. So needed. Really is. Is it a sign of the times, or has it always been there but not spoken of before?
Well, I think, you know, like Angela was saying earlier, and like Stella was saying earlier, you know, I think it always has been there. But I think, you know, since the Sarah Everard stuff, and then there was the website where girls were talking about what was happening in school, and now there's been this Ofsted report, you know, because it's like an official report saying this is happening to 9 out of 10 girls in schools. They can't just say, use the boys will be boys excuse, because there's an official thing now. So, you know, I do feel sorry for teachers, because, you know, they don't have the training to deal with this stuff, and, you know, they're just trying to do their best sort of thing, and I understand that, which is, you know, why we're going to give them the tool of training. But, you know, they need to be trauma informed. If there's a child in their class that has complex PTSD, They need to know how to support that child. If that child is dealing with their trauma by self-harming, they need to know how to support them. If they're going down the way, if they're witnessing domestic abuse at home, so they start having food issues because they can't control anything else in their lives, they need to know how to support that child. So we're having all these conversations in the new PSHE, which is great, but there's going to be consequences of that. There's going to be a lot of children who think these things are normal, who are then going to go into school, realise they're not, and then the teacher's going to what? Not know what to do or say. So, you know, we felt there's a gap there that they need to know how to deal with this stuff.
Yeah, I think it's a brilliant initiative. I've been thinking about it in terms of pornography only. That, you know, it should be the responsibility of every school to make sure that it's in a porn-free environment to begin with, as a starting point. How is this possible for children to bring their phone at school and be able to access this content at school? It's supposed to be a safe place for everybody. It's unbelievable. I mean, yeah, add that to the fact that toilets are now becoming gender neutral. As a kid, as a girl, the toilet were the only place where I felt safe in my school. Now girls don't even have that. Like,
No.
this is tragic. The other thing I wanted to comment on, yes matters a lot, and no matters more, I think. And I think that as girls, we are taught from, I mean, at the age of 3, every children knows how to say no quite clearly, and then girls are taught to unlearn the word no. Like, we are really taught that it's not a valid thing. We are taught how to not respect or not maintain our boundaries. We don't know how to do this as a group. And I'm really, you know, yes, consent is important to teach, but at the same time, you know, what I would really love girls to be taught on a big scale is to just be able to say no and maintain that, because, you know, unfortunately, men, after so many years of women's movement, of feminist movement, still have trouble understanding what consent means. I mean, you see Jess Taylor's Jess Taylor and Jamie Shrive research, where they were talking about, and this is actually replicated the same in France, where more than 50% of women said they experience penetration when they were asleep in bed by their partners, and most men didn't really realize that it was a problem. How can we be in a situation where a man rapes a woman and doesn't even realize it? It's like, you know, what does consent mean in that context? What does it mean when they don't even make a difference between sex and rape? It means nothing. Sorry.
I think that they do. I think men do know the difference.
I really don't think so. I really don't think so. Honestly,
I mean, pornography definitely skews that, because, you know, it makes out that, you know, violence like rape porn and stuff, it is a thing. 50 Shades of crap and all that thing hasn't helped. But essentially, men know why they're scared to go to a prison shower. They know why that is.
But they don't apply the difference when they have a relationship with women. So they don't know the difference in a heterosexual context. Yeah, when it's their body who's being disrespected, they understand that. When it's somebody else's, they learn it through pornography. It gives them pleasure. What is it? What's bad about it? I don't get it. Oh, she was asleep, but she loved it. How do you know?
Because they see the woman as a possession that they can do what they want with. So.
I was just about to say the same, Iris.
And they are the subjects. That's the problem. And until we are rehumanized and not seen as objects anymore, like, I mean, you know, we've seen this throughout history, and, you know, but with women it seems to have gone on a lot longer. You know, you call a group of people a name, whether that be benefit scrounger, whether that be, you know, racist names, whether that be anti-Semitic names, or, you know, whatever it is, you other the people first. And unfortunately, our dehumanization has got together with capitalism, and it's a mess. But I think the reason they do it is because we're the object, and therefore they're entitled to use us for their gratification, because they are the subject, and that's how they see us.
One thing I wanted to reflect on when you were the first item in your thing I thought was really interesting. And I agree, it's really linked. I see so many posts on social media of women saying they think they're straight, they think of themselves as heterosexual, and they're like, I can't date men. Like, when I think about what they watch, I'm like, I mean, you know, I imagine being 20 and trying to find a boyfriend in a world like that. Like, it's...
Yeah, I saw a comedian before COVID, obviously, because, you know, I've done fuck all since COVID. But yeah, before COVID, there was a lesbian comedian, and she said, guys, listen, women, they love your dick. They love it. It's amazing. But they are so tired of what's attached to it. And I was like, that is so true. That is so true. Yeah, it's such a mess, and there's the whole issue of men wanting younger and younger women as well. I mean, again, reinforced by pornography. But I remember when I was growing up, when I was a teenager, there was this big issue about teen mums, teen single mums. What a problem the UK has with teen single mums. But when I did some research on it as an adult, I found that the average age of the fathers of those teenage mums was 29 plus. So we never had a teenage mum problem. We had a paedophile problem. But again, it's, you know, it's framed as the woman that's a problem. And I remember also thinking that, you know, that it, to be a single mum is, or a teenage mum, it was all, oh, how terrible, she's ruined her life, she's wasted her life, she'll never do anything, blah, blah, blah. But, you know, a lot of the teen mums that I knew then, they were sort of like, they had more skills, like not that they'd had to mature quicker, but like they had this responsibility now. So they developed things more than the rest of us did. They seemed more mature. They started taking school more seriously because they, you know, they wanted their kids. Suddenly they had like this different way of thinking about things. So I actually thought that these teen mums were actually showing that they were more responsible. They took their responsibility. They were gaining new skills, you know, and yet they were shamed. Like, one of the worst things you can be is a dole-dossing single mum in our society. You know, that's the Daily Mail's headline every other day, that it isn't about Princess Diana, it's about how terrible single mothers are. And, you know, and yet actually there are some positive things about being the parent that sticks around, takes the responsibility, you know, and picks up the slack.
It really is the ultimate victim blaming, isn't it? But nobody sees them as victim because they're seen as sluts. That's it. And of course, the responsibility lies with the adult who did that to them. What I really question is when, you know, we're in a society where pedophiliac tendency, let's call it that. I mean, you know, teen and lesbian are the two most searched term in pornography, right, Gemma? Am I right? I think it is.
And revenge porn as well.
And revenge porn now. Okay, I searched a while ago, but definitely teen is in there, lesbian is in there. These two category of women, you know, that are females that men should not access sexually. When it's so normalized, when it's so common, is this really, I don't know, like, is this really not the norm? Is this not really what heterosexuality is about? This power difference between men and women that they want, that they desire to be much weaker than them so they can control.
Yeah, it is. Like, pornography is full of you know, women to be as thin and as hairless as little girls as well. Like, I went on a date with a guy a few years ago, and he asked me, he was like, oh, have you shaved down there? And I just said, oh, right, why? How long have you been a paedophile for? And he was so shocked. And I was like, why? Well, what other explanation is there for you to want my genitals to look like they belong to a little girl?
Yes.
Explain that to me.
What happened there?
Now I think.
I mean, we didn't get married or anything, you know.
Goodness for that.
Yeah, I just sort of took my pint and said, "Oh, I'm sorry, I like men who are into adults," and I just drank my pint, because you can't leave your pint, right? And then
It's an extraordinary new thing, this whole shaved.
Yeah.
It's just so strange, and it's come so quickly, and I feel it's porn. It's pornified.
I'm just noting how much we've talked today about porn, and I think there's really something going on in the culture, that this is everywhere, that it's so extreme. And, you know, people in general and human sexuality really, it's like there's this demand for novelty. So it gets kind of more and more extreme. And it really is worrying that so many young people, this is their first exposure to sexuality. And I think we don't understand yet what this is doing to people and to our culture. But I think we're going to find out.
Lisa,
it's pretty dark.
Yours was, I think, the only non-pornified segment so far.
And that was fairy tales.
Yeah. Gemma, thank you so much for that. Chinzia, what do you have for us?
So I just briefly, I'm going to talk about Lisa Kiao. She's a university student at Abertay Uni who's just been cleared. She's just been cleared of lots of complaints. She said only women have vaginas and are weaker than men. She's a law student. Other students complained about her. She was put through a few months of hell. She's going through her exams, and I'm trying to tie this into motherhood, because this is a motherhood special. And I just feel it did bring out the mothering side in me. The poor girl's being put through this. But actually, she's 29. She's 29 years old. But you still feel, no, you don't want to send your daughters to university to be put through that. So it's really off-putting for mothers, knowing that our daughters may face this inquisition. Or I was with a group of women last night, and I'm not going to go too personal, but there were women that knew that their children may come back and tell them off for having a female rights stickers. And so, yeah, so for mothers, it's that pressure of they might come back and face the inquisition, or that they come home and put their parents through the inquisition. So my question really is, how do mothers push back against this, woke, we call it woke, whatever, woke politics? How do you assert your authority in your own home? And Lisa, I'm going to go with the shadow, because I've been reading a little bit about your theory. How do we bring the shadow out, that ferocious mum that says no, and to society, not just to children at home, to society, to stop this?
Yeah, I actually think that's a really great question. And I appreciate your point about authority. It seems like there's something going on in the culture that is, and maybe I'll say around the woke stuff, that actually seems like I don't know that it's aiming to undermine parental authority, but boy, it's sure doing that. And you're right that it is often kind of pitting young people against their parents. And it's so hard, because once these kids are really, I'm going to say, indoctrinated into this belief system, you can't argue with them. You can't argue with them. And it is hard. You do have to kind of try to find your ferocity. And ferocity is something that comes with being comfortable with your anger. So there's the shadow stuff. If you have trouble finding your anger, that might be part of your shadow work. But even so, as mothers, we're so isolated by the culture, because we're maybe, teaching our kids one thing, but then they're imbibing all of this stuff from schools, from the universities, from the internet. And, we can be just as fierce as we possibly can, and still our kids might come back to us and get angry at us for having a sticker, or call us a TERF or something like that. So it's hard. Parents are incredibly isolated, which I think kind of goes back to Stella's organization.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yes.
My youngest is at college. When she started college, I discussed with her all this new stuff about non-binary, etc. And I asked her, "What do you think?" And she was like, I think we have one non-binary. I have one non-binary friend. 2 years on, and it's like, no, I don't agree with anything that you think, Mum. So she's totally been indoctrinated into all of it because they're her friends. So we just agree to disagree and respect each other's points of views. We just don't discuss it really.
I really think one thing about the younger kids and the college kids and the teenagers, I think they don't realize that they are subscribing to a belief, and it's a belief that there's a gender within you, very like a soul, and very much coming from the Christian concept of you have an essence within you, and that essence is, it's not findable. It's so like a soul, but it's called a gender identity, and on which the entire kind of queer theory and certainly, gender identity theory rests. And I don't think these kids realize that they're buying into a belief system. They just think it is, that we do have a gender identity that's unprovable, unfalsifiable, unfindable. It's there within us somewhere. And it seems extraordinarily disconnected from our bodies and the impact of testosterone and the impact of estrogen and the impact of who we are as physical beings. And it feels like it feels like these are the digital children of their age, and they're so disembodied, sort of out of their bodies, that they think you could be. Like my original point, they don't know. I'd say your kid doesn't know that she's fallen into a belief and presumes it's a fact.
No, I think it's also emotional manipulation. Like I'm saying, it's her friends, isn't it? So all her Instagram is full of her friends, and the majority are all he, him, she, her, etc. So it's all, it's like my friends do it, sort of thing. Yeah.
God. I wanted to reflect on what you were saying about Stella, about the disconnection. I think that's why it works so well on autistic children or traumatized children, because it is about dissociation. It's a lot about being disconnected from the body. I also wanted to make a point about what you were saying, Lisa, about and Chinzia, about the authority. I hear so many moms saying, "Oh, but like that fear of upsetting the kid, or that fear of saying no, of placing a boundary, of even daring to disagree because you might lose them." And my experience is like, I did some fucked up stuff as a kid. Like, I would have loved to have a mom who said, stop, back off, don't do that. Like, don't get married at 21. I got married at 21. I would have loved my mom to say, not a good idea. All right.
Would you have listened to her though?
No, but when shit hit the fan, I would have known she was by my side. When I would have, I would have had a reference point. I would have known where she stood, you see? And I think it's really important, even if they don't listen, or you think they don't listen at that moment, that, they know where you are and they know where you stand. And you've said it very clearly, respectfully, but clearly and firmly. And then if they do realize, oh, I've got a question, they can come back and ask. And very often I see that there's, and I'm not judging. I know it's a very difficult topic, and I've not been through that myself because mine is 8. So it's not yet been a problem. But I think it's really important to say things, even if it means there's going to be a conflict because there's going to be a no, because parenting is not about saying yes all the time, isn't it? I mean, on other things, we would say no. But even on other things, I hear parents saying, oh, he gets as many screen time as he wants. I'm like, why? Like, this authority is really, really under, like, legitimate authority as a parent. I've got this 8-year-old, and I've been very honest about, there are men who pretend they are women. They're going to talk to you about it at school. When they do, please come and speak to me. I don't know what else I can do right now. It's obviously I talk about it at home and my activism, so he knows what I'm up to, but try to do it in a way that if he is confronted to it, I hope it's going to come. But I don't know. We're going to have to find out.
Angela, I think that's a great point about sort of parents needing to utilize their authority. And that's a great story about what you wish your mom had said, and no, you wouldn't have listened to her, but then you would have had a reference point. You would have known you could come back. That's a really poignant story. Yeah. And one of the things that I've just seen, and again, this goes to Stella, your organization, is just how demonized mothers are. And it's mothers, it's not fathers, but mothers are ridiculed. They're not taken seriously. And, the mothers in Genspect, man, they are knowledgeable. They love their kids. And yet it's so easy for different facets of the culture to make them look like hateful, bigoted, idiotic, backward. And it's just really heartbreaking to see mothers discounted so much.
Hey, there's a reason that they call any woman meeting together a mother's meeting. They don't say that about dads, right? This dismissing, whatever we say is just irrelevant gossip shit.
Yeah.
Exchanging recipes.
Or we're nagging, or it's old wives' tales, or, whatever the name you want to call it. My son goes to a school for young people with mental disabilities. And I had a lovely chat with his school last week. They sent home a thing about the new PSHE, and they said one of the learning outcomes was that the young people needed to know about the protected characteristics in the Equality Act, and they needed to be aware of them. And they put gender instead of sex, and they put gender identity instead of gender reassignment. So I sent them an email saying, if you want the children to learn about these protected characteristics, can I suggest that the staff learn them first? This is what they actually are. And then I got a phone call from the deputy head, who told me that they meant the same thing, and that I was wrong about that, and that they know how to do the PSHE thing because they're teachers, they know better than me. So I made him go to the website, and I made him read my name out to me because I helped to write the PSHE. And so, and after that, he was a lot nicer to me, and now they've agreed that they will send me some of their lesson plans for me to look over, because I pointed out to him, which might be useful for any other mums to know, that, a lot of the trans stuff reinforces gender stereotypes, but the government guidelines are very clear that gender stereotypes are supposed to be highlighted as damaging and harmful and limiting, and they shouldn't be reinforced. And they've also stipulated that any outside agencies have to be scientifically evidence-based, and they're not allowed to be ideologically based, and they're not allowed to be politically based. Mm-hmm. So, that's useful to look at the schools.
Yeah. Well, ladies, it's been really, really fascinating chatting and listening to all of you today. Thank you so much. All the information should scroll down the bottom for each one of you, including yours, Gemma, your website. So thank you once again. And can I just quickly say congratulations to Maya.
Yay.
Sorry. Congratulations to Maya.
Congratulations
for her. This is for her.
Well. Congratulations to Lisa Kiao as well for winning.
Lisa as well, yeah.
She's sort of been drowned out by what's happened to Maya, but to both.
It has, definitely. Thank you once again. Please like, share and subscribe. And good night to everyone.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye now.